fellow insomniacs. I hope this soft-spoken tale inspired by true events helps you fall asleep. I know there are plenty of us who are relaxed by listening to these soft-spoken narrations, especially when there is a relaxing background, in this case, sound of rain. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce some of the words, since I'm not a native speaker, but I do hope that my voice and the story will make up for it. If you enjoy this type of content, please like and subscribe. This will help appease the algorithm gods and motivate me to make many more. I will preface this story by stressing that I am in no way, shape, or form a superstitious person. Or I wasn't before that night. I'm also an atheist and believe, or believed, only in science and hard facts. I do, however, have a background in art history, which did include many grueling nights, learning about various myths and legends that come into play in many artworks. So after this happened, I was reminded of a particular legend from my region. And let me tell you, it didn't make me feel any better. Not at all. At that time, I lived in a small town, which in my country is most famous for its asylum and corn. The town was typical for the region, existing of small houses lying perfectly next to each other, with backyards usually containing a patch of land used for vegetables or small livestock. Even though the town was very small, we also had 3 churches of 2 different Christian denominations, since the region comprised several nationalities that lived peacefully together. Religion was a big part of everyday life, even though it was mainly observed through customs and traditions that were heavily influenced by old pagan beliefs. Our family home was situated, like in some typical laughable horror movie, close to a local cemetery that continued onto a large cornfield just over the asylum. Trifecta, you may say, of things you don't want to be near if you believe horror stories. This has never bothered me, it was just something that was there. Cemetery was a place where we kids would climb over to get from the school faster in the evening. The cornfield was a boring sight, and the institution that housed hundreds of seriously mentally ill patients was just something we were teased about when we would say which town we were from. However, to be completely honest, it wasn't exactly pleasant when some of the more dangerous patients escaped, climbing over the huge gates, and we would be warned by local authorities to be on the lookout. For us kids, it wasn't pleasant for the single reason that we had to play only outside our house and come home early for dinner, and nothing more and nothing less. This story, though, didn't happen when I was a kid, as one might think, since kids have large imagination and their tales can be taller than those damn corn stalks near our home. It happened when I was almost 25 and preparing to move to a completely different country to continue my studies abroad and get away from small-town gossip, boredom, and general lack of prospects. I was coming back late from a bigger city, taking the last bus ride home, which meant that I was at the bus stop just after midnight. The bus stop is located half an hour walk from our home, which was never an issue since, barring 1 or 2 escaped patients if they were around, the town was safe, and on the worst night you could see or hear wild dogs, common in the area, that could maybe put a little spring in your step while you would assure yourself that if you don't show fear, they will not attack. I know it's a cliché of clichés to say this, but it was a dark and stormy night. It was mid-November, and on top of that, our region is famous for its terrible wind that gets into your bones, and there are no layers of wool that could prevent that insidious chill getting the best of you. It didn't help that I was coming home from a date and was wearing what I thought at the time was a cool-looking coat, which in hindsight was only cool, as in doing goddamn nothing from protecting me from the elements, and did very little in terms of my outfit, except maybe making me look like a dork. But in spite of my poor wardrobe choice, the date went well, and I was in high spirits, already thinking when I could text my date tomorrow without seeming too needy. I have always been introverted and a little awkward, little being an euphemism as much as saying that I have been experiencing light summer breeze that night. So my thoughts were preoccupied with analyzing did I say something stupid, or rather how many stupid things I said, and hoping my date didn't find my attempts at humor too tiresome. I tried burying my head deep into the collar of my coat, cursing the weather but smiling just the same, thinking of something nice my date said to me. I was walking as fast as I could, and after I almost fell on my frozen nose due to sleet and ice on the road, I had to pace myself. 5 minutes after walking the empty streets, lined with small houses, hearing the occasional cat that didn't care that it wasn't February yet, I was close to the vast cornfield on my left. The wind howling made the corn emit a strange sound, a susurrus whisper with gravitas, and as I pondered later on, an omen of things to come. The field was large, and it would take you good 10 minutes on a good day to pass by its side, and the sound started making me feel uneasy. I tried to shake the feeling away, adding the metaphorical shaking to a very real one my body was doing at the time, but the sense of unease stayed with me just the same. I was desperately recalling my date, things we've seen and done, how and what we talked about to lift my spirits again. I was starting to work and I was almost completely away in the blissful state again. The sound of metal chains clanging against each other spurred my attention back to my surroundings again, and I wondered whether they had to chain the cemetery again due to constant breakings by local teenagers and kids. Once, the staff from the institution even found a patient there, lying on a tombstone, proclaiming that the dead had called him to guard their spirits. I have never feared the patients. I understood even back then that most of them were harmless and troubled souls, even though it was known that some of them were dangerous due to their delusions and did attack some residents. But they never did it out of malice, which is something in people I do fear, so I never really gave it a second thought when my family would warn me about him. I thought, and I still do, that it was prejudice and small-town gossip that made them talk about him in such manner. The last street lamp was more than a mile away back, and I was nearing the cemetery when I heard the sound of metal clanging again, now louder, the sound forming a constant rhythm, underlined with continuous susurrus corn made with help of a vicious wind. I eased my step, now looking apprehensively at my surroundings, and barely seeing through rain, noticed 1/4 of a mile away the gates of the cemetery on my left, chained but shaking vigorously. At first, I thought it was due to the wind, but my inner voice betrayed me of my superficial comfort and told me that those gates were too heavy to shake like that, even with this weather. I proceeded with caution, watching my step, looking around and trying to regain my composure. Suddenly, I couldn't think on my date anymore. I was just focused on those gates and counting the minutes until I could turn the corner and see the distant shape of my house. I wish that I wasn't stone cold sober, since I couldn't drink during the date, being on antibiotics at the time. That diverted my thoughts a little, cursing myself for going out in this weather, wearing the stupid coat while I was still getting over my sinus infection. This self-examination of my choices and lack of common sense didn't last long, because the sound of the chains now was overpowered by a scream. I say scream, but it was more of a howling. One continuous scream, screeching that seemed to envelop the wind, the rain, and every single atom of air around me. I stopped dead in my tracks. I looked around me, searching for wild dogs or pack of nefarious cats from hell set to devour me. I tried to calm my breathing, which was suddenly ragged, thinking that whatever it was, it will hear me, not pondering the fact that my heavy boots already made my presence known. The screaming, or whatever it was, subsided, and I continued to walk, trying not to look at the cemetery and now wishing that my only choice of outfit was actually smart. My heavy boots were ballerina slippers. Damn the ice and all, I wanted to be as silent as a mouse, which is how I suddenly felt, small and easily swiped away, or eaten, because I was a prey and something was hunting me. The sound was gone, but the presence of something, Something I couldn't pinpoint, not only visually, but not even in my mind's eye was there, so real that it almost felt solid. It felt as strong and as invisible as the wind, and I started to feel the cold sweat appearing from every cell of my being. I knew by the shapes of houses that I only had to walk very fast for another 3 minutes or so, and I would almost leave the cemetery behind me. I continued to walk, now briskly, not caring about the ice and rain, when I heard the scream again. I almost started to run, but I was afraid that whatever this was, it would see this as a signal to hunt me down, and I couldn't trust my legs that I wouldn't fall on ice before I even attempted to move. The cold sweat was now covering my eyes, all the memories of my date gone, everything a blur except for a piercing fear. And then I felt it. Something was suddenly on my back and shoulders, grabbing at me with claws, screaming into my ears. I started yelling, trying to shake it off, but its steady grip wouldn't let go, and its voice, if it could be called a voice, was piercing through my brain like a hot needle. There was no thinking involved, just pure animal instinct, and I was flailing my arms, prepared to run and fight at the same time. The thing wouldn't let go, yet except from the claws digging into my shoulders and back, it didn't bite me or scratch my face. It felt like I was fighting it forever, so much so that I was almost getting used to the screaming creature grappling my back. So I had a second of clarity, thinking why the neighbors didn't respond to any of my cries for help. Damn it, how come they didn't hear this demon screaming if nothing else? My inner cynic reminded me that in this small town, everybody minded their own business, and they probably thought it was a domestic fight. Or in other words, somebody else's problem, which they would gladly discuss the following morning. My survival instinct finally emerged, and something deep within me told me to stop fighting. I managed to make myself calm, or as calm as you can be while something is clawing at your back, piggybacking the creature slowly down the street. The screaming stopped immediately, and just as it did, I heard a voice in my head. I knew it wasn't my inner voice, because it went straight in, but from the outside, if that makes any sense, but I have no words to describe it better. The chapel, it said. My mind started racing, knowing that I had to listen to it if I wanted to come back home in one piece. I just knew. I started to answer and then realized that I didn't have to talk, that this thing, whatever it was, could hear my thoughts. The cemetery chapel? Somehow managing to add a question mark in my mind. I waited for an answer, feeling the claws on my back taking even further. Silence. Somehow I knew that I asked the right question, and that answer was yes. Like an automaton, I turned back and started going back to the gates and walls guarding the cemetery. I wasn't myself anymore. I was a device for this thing, fear making me numb and as obedient as proverbial cattle before slaughter. I measured my steps, doing my best not to think and just focus on what I had to do, because I was afraid that the creature would read my thoughts. I stood in front of the gates. They were high, impossible to climb, even in the summer. However, the walls on the side were made of stone, brick and mortar, depleted with age. And even though it was high, more than twice my height, it was possible, I thought maniacally, to climb over it if I held on to bits of brick and stone that were damaged. I had to get over it, and I thought if people can climb Mount Everest, I can climb this wall while the creature from some other dimensions is whispering its commands in my ear. For some reason I thought that was funny, me comparing myself in this situation with professional climbers who had nothing to fear except the regular fears of falling down, being done by elements, or hunger. I thought I had it worse. They knew what to expect. They didn't have a goddamn mind-reading demon on their back, which made me think that my father would say something stupid like, "You mean your mother?" That would make me roll my eyes in normal circumstances. but now made me laugh like I heard the best joke ever told in the history of mankind. The chapel. A hysterical laughter stopped. I started to tremble again, but now I was inspecting the walls with my gloved hands. Yes, I'm the idiot that brought the gloves but didn't have a good coat. I was trying to figure out where I could grip onto the wall, cursing myself for not charging myself so I could use the flashlight. I didn't even think at the time to beat myself over the fact that if I did charge myself, I could have called someone. Though, thinking back, I don't think that the creature would allow me to. I suddenly had a flash of memory, a few years back. One drunken New Year's Eve, and my friends thought it was an awesome idea to celebrate the night by climbing over the cemetery wall and drink our packed cheap red wine on the old benches near the graves. My mate, who used to live nearby, took us to the part of the wall that was a little way back from where I was standing now, and showed us the place where you could, when young and stupid, think it was easy to climb over, using the protruding bricks and pieces of rusty metal that I had no idea why was there. Some bad masonry attempt by local council, I thought. I let my legs do the walking and remembering for me, trusting them more than my mind, and walked slowly while trying to ignore the heavy thing on my back, now feeling its claws as if they were digging into my bones. I found the spot, just as it was, but now wet and dark, and it didn't look as easy to climb over as it did when I was young, drunk and stupid. Or just more stupid and younger, my inner editor corrected. I took off my gloves, knowing that I had to feel what I was holding onto, and put my boot up the first protruding stone and grabbed the rusty metal like my life depended on it, as I was sure it did. I managed to lift myself up, and now again let my body do the work. Yes, on your left. Another brick just there. Put your other boot just over here. Now use your shoulder muscles just like that. No, don't think what's on them. Go, 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 go. Left hand there. Pull, pull. Coat ripped. Never mind. Go. You're almost on top. Every single muscle ache, but I felt purpose. I felt my body helping me. Cold, sweat and all forgotten. I was a kid on New Year's Eve. My friends were cheering me on and I could do it. I knew I could. I was on top. I started to climb down, which was much easier because on the other side the wall wasn't as steep and was even more uneven. And I almost jumped too soon, excited that I did it. But suddenly the claws gripped me tighter, and that helped me to compose myself. Composed being the word meaning less hysterical, and climbed a little lower before I finally jumped on the wet ground. I turned around and looked at the tombstone, crosses and patches of dead plants. The chapel, I heard in my mind again. I wasn't a kid anymore. I was back to here and now, with a demon on my back, drenched in sweat and mud, dirty and scared as a baby deer. I looked around the graveyard, which wasn't an easy task, because it was almost half the size of cornfield, housing hundreds of generations of surrounding villages. Certainly it looked as big as an ocean to me at the time, and I felt as lost as I was when I was almost 3, and my parents left me in the big department store alone for a second, only to find me half an hour later sobbing near the toilets. Don't think. Feel. Use your legs. Don't overthink. You know this place, you were here so many times. Remember when you were trying to impress that neighbor and went around showing all the interesting graves and dates and trying to look cool while you were dispersing facts on various time periods and how people lived back then, you self-absorbed future academic. I continued onto my left and started to walk slowly between the graves, trying to mind my step, because somehow I knew I shouldn't let myself fall, that I mustn't in any way, shape or form hurt the thing on my back, that if I did, I would be the one suffering more. The silence around me was interrupted by a howl of the wild dogs, and for the first time in my life I couldn't care less. I already had something much worse happening to me, and if anything, Wild dogs would be an upgrade. Or walk in the park. It seemed that the creature didn't care either, and I took its silence as approval to go on. I walked behind an old bench below the old willow tree and made a turn toward the center of the cemetery, noticing an old grave belonging to a Second World War victim. I was, and still am, a Second World War aficionado. Yes, using those words with my neighbor didn't help making me seem less of a prick. And I remember that it was a child's grave, only 1 year old when the bombs killed him, but left his family alive. Or alive as you can be when you lose a child in a home, I thought. I knew that they had more children after him, rebuilt their life, and said very little of him later, my granddaddy telling me how his mother wouldn't ever speak his name after that. I guess it was easier like that. The times were different, and people deal with things in their own way. The mind does curious things like that, makes you think of things that don't seem relevant to your current peril, protecting you from the horror that is happening to you at the moment. Otherwise you would just crumple up and die of sheer fear and desperation. I continued onwards, now the feeling of claws in my back already a familiar feeling. Walking over the falling leaves and branches, certain that I know where the chapel was. I calculated that it was only a mile ahead, and for the first time a chilling thought emerged from my mind. What happens when we get there? And I thought we, not I. Because now there wasn't me without the creature, it was we. We who climbed over the wall. We were going to the chapel, and only one of us knew why and what will happen when we do get there. I steadied my step, starting to feel every inch of my body's aches and pains. My body that has been through so much in so little time was on borrowed time, and that time was now coming to collect the payment. And the payment was like hot steel piercing through my muscles, my tendons and my bloody sinuses that were like a reminder of a long forgotten normalcy. The time when I was an average person, taking antibiotics for regular infection. The time when I was eating lunch and wondering what to wear for my night in the big city. The time when time and space made sense, and I was not a captive to something I couldn't begin to comprehend but knew I had to survive. I didn't know why I had to survive. Maybe because I was young and created life I was hoping yet to really experience. Or maybe just because I had to tell someone this in my old age, or because we didn't kiss that night. My certainty that I had to survive was shaken by my knowledge that I had no idea how I will persevere in doing so, because that thing on my back, holding on to me like its life depended on it as much as mine depended on its mercy, had plans for me, and I was oblivious to what they were except for the fact that I had to be a good listener. Don't ask me how I knew I had to listen to it. Maybe because of those screams. Those screams that were as terrifying as they were sad. As sad as I was in that department store when I realized I was lost. When I felt as there was nothing that could bring me back to my mother, and that I was all alone and that nobody could see me little and scared. We were approaching the chapel. I saw the 2 benches I remembered from before in front of it. And on cue, my body rebelled again, hurting me for hurting it. I thought how nice it would be to just lie down there and let the wind and rain and ice cover me into dreamless sleep, not caring at that moment if I would wake up. The creature must have felt that, my resolve to survive diminishing with each step. It screamed bloody murder into my ear, and that's all it took to wake me up from my trance-like state I suddenly fell into. As soon as I started to walk again, the creature stopped screaming. Finally, we were in front of the chapel. For the first time, I said aloud, "What do you want me to do?" "Listen." I heard its voice in my mind. I sat on the bench, bent like an old oak carrying its huge branches, which in my case was a thing on my back that I sensed didn't want to be touching the bench. And then it started screaming again, but these were screams of pure sadness, wailing beyond sorrow that any living thing should ever experience. Cries for heaven and hell, pleads for mercy and love. And in that moment I remembered when I heard something similar. It was when my baby sister, only 1 year old at the time, fell from the bed I left her on unsupervised, her little face red with pain, her mouth shaped in permanent howl, crying with abandon, because that's what she felt, abandoned and forgotten, dropped, left, and unloved. I did what I did then. I started saying words of comfort, shushing, saying that it will be alright. I'm here, don't worry. I will not leave you again, you are loved. I was a fool to leave you there. I should have been there. Don't cry. It will be alright. I promise you, you will never be left alone again. Mom will be here with me, and Dad too. They just had to leave you with me for a while. It was my mistake. They love you to bits. They do. Shh. Don't upset yourself so much. I'm here. Hold on to me. You're okay now, my love. I don't know how long I was talking, but I never stopped, and didn't even notice when the crying subsided. But just before the dawn, I felt the claws become something else, like the small hands of my sister when she was a baby, and would grab me to give her a piggyback ride with that fearsome determination only small children have. The sun, such as it was, arrived, and the feeling of small hands on my back disappeared. I smiled. I didn't know why at the time, but smile I did, while I shakily dragged my tortured body upright, starting to make a long way back to the wall. My mind was a haze, and I was certainly in shock and suffering from hypothermia, so obviously I wasn't even thinking that I was in no state to climb over the wall. I just knew that's where I came from, so my legs were taking me back. I was passing by graves old and new, following the same path back when I turned the corner and realized that I stopped. I was looking at a small tombstone, name almost completely erased by time and elements. I remembered his name. I will not share it with you, because you didn't know him, and I did. His parents did, even though they pretended they didn't when he left this wretched yet beautiful place thoroughly to be left alone. I thought how, at that time during the war, his parents probably didn't even have time to baptize him yet, which was something that in my region was usually done very early on, often just before child's first birthday. I took one of my gloves and tried to clean his stone, as much as that was possible, and with strength I didn't know I had, started pulling the beads around his resting place. The caretaker found me a couple of hours later, swearing to everyone later on that I was talking to myself, holding beads in my raw, cut-up hands, nails dirty and mangled. He said I was mumbling, something about love and how someone is not alone. I don't remember much. Just after that, I started to come back when my hands were bandaged and I was already in a local facility. Nurses giving me this and that, and my parents looking owlishly at me beside my bed. When anyone asked me for an explanation, I gave some lame story about probably being given a spiked drink, which made me for some inexplicable reason end up in the cemetery all night, which my folks and the neighbors suspicious of the goings-on in the big city readily accepted as an explanation. It's more than 10 years since this happened, and now I live in a different country. I have no asylum or cornfield or graveyard close to my apartment, just a nice park and a bike path. But every time I come back home, because that place will always be my home, that's just how we were raised, and some things you can't shake off, no matter how far you go or how different you think you are. I always make a point of visiting my young friend's resting place and telling him he's not forgotten. Oh, and I know you rascals want to know. I did have a second date, and we kissed, and still do, 10 years on. Since I am a historian in heart, albeit one that dealt with art, and even though I strayed in my later studies from it, it wasn't too far away. Sociology and culture are in my focus now. Maybe that was due to my young friend. I compiled a little essay from various bits I found online that could maybe shed a light on my experience for you folks. I'm not sure that it's relevant at all. I know what I felt in my heart. I knew what I had to do at the time. But I know how people like to have explanations that go beyond the one's feeling, so that they can turn it into feelings of their own. That's how legends and stories are made. And here it is. The Screamer, or the Screecher, also called Drakovats, is a mythical creature in South Slavic mythology. In South Slavic mythology and folk tales, the creature has been variously described, and here are some examples of their horrifying image. Humanoid canine creature that walks on its back legs, a long-necked, long-legged creature with a cat-like head, or a one-legged humanoid creature with glowing eyes that wanders around during nighttime and scares people. And, to me the scariest and the saddest one, is a creature having a dappled, elongated and spittle-thin body with a disproportionately large head. This creature can fly, and it is believed to be the soul of a dead child. This last description is used in many folktales, where it has been depicted in the form of an undead, unbaptized child that rose out from its grave during the nighttime to haunt its parents. This creature is known for calling out to people passing near cemeteries to baptize it. Here we see the connection between baptism and the Screamer, and how old pagan Slavic beliefs mix with Christianity, something that is still quite common today in various customs, traditions, and beliefs. When assuming the form of a child, it predicts someone's death, while in its animal form, it predicts cattle disease. This creature is believed to avoid dogs and bright light. Also, it is believed that if the shadow of a creature falls upon some person, that person will turn sick and die. Also, in some regions, it is believed that the souls of people who drowned or committed suicide can become a screecher, as well as people who weren't buried according to traditional rules. This is interesting since it was popularly believed to be especially common during the 12 days of Christmas, called Unbaptized Days in the region, and in early spring, when other demons and mythical creatures were believed to be more active. And here we see again how old beliefs mix with Orthodox Christianity. This creature has a terrible voice. It screams similar to child's crying, wolf howling, or cats meowing, but with otherworldly taste to it, and their screams can make a person deaf. The creature has sharp, claw-like nails. They are afraid of daylight and dogs, and can only be seen during the night while wailing along the forests and cemeteries between midnight and dawn. They cannot be destroyed until their soul finds the peace they so desperately crave. According to legends, they are found in holes, caves, swamps, and rivers. The creature attacks people who find themselves late at night near a cemetery or a forest by jumping on their back and making them carry it and walk all night until the first rooster is heard in the village. Unless the victim fulfills its demands, the creature scratches it and claws them with their sharp nails. When the dawn comes, it pushes its tired victim next to the road or forest and leaves them to lay there. In some regions, it is believed that these creatures can attack people who find themselves late at night next to windmills, rivers and swamps, drag them to water, and leave them to drown in a whirlpool. The creature is believed to be a bad omen, and their presence and screams announce the death of some person or cattle, start of a war, fire, or deadly disease in cattle and humans. If a shadow of a creature falls on someone, that person will fall to an incurable illness and die. Screecher has an ability to appear in dreams, where he haunts the person dreaming of them, and sometimes they try to strangle them in sleep. This belief can be connected to modern explanation that one of the origins of Screecher is connected to sleep paralysis. Even today, the sightings of Screechers are not uncommon, and local newspapers still publish stories about them. various sightings of a horrifying creature that kills numerous cattle and domestic animals, or scare local people with terrible screams while flying through the night. I don't know if this helps you understand what happened to me, or if it has anything to do with that night. But as a self-absorbed prick I still am, I tried giving my broken heart, because it did break for him that night, some kind of explanation that I could hold on to. Mind how you go, my little friend. You're not alone.